Yeah, good morning, everybody. How we doing? Good to see you. Good to see you. I was reading a story last week about Warren Buffett, and everybody knows who Warren Buffett is, the fourth wealthiest man on the planet. Interesting story. In 2006, he made an announcement that he was going to give away a big chunk of his net worth. So far as of last week, from the numbers that I could find, he has given away to date almost $30 billion. That's with a B, right? That's a lot of zeros, isn't it? That's a lot of zeros. The interesting thing about it, though, is that he doesn't give it directly to a charity or directly to a church or directly to a cause that he's interested in or that he cares about. In fact, he's given the great majority of that money to the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And back in 2006, when he made the announcement, he was asked why he did that. And his answer, in essence, was that he was good at making money, but not very good at giving it away. And one of the talk show hosts, one of the talk shows that he was on at that time, basically asked the question that I think everybody was thinking. Who does that? You can't learn to give money away. You can't pick up that skill. You can't figure that out. I think I could probably figure that out. Now, here's the thing. When somebody has billions of dollars, his net worth, even today, I think is estimated at about $50 billion. We look at a guy like that, at a person like that, and we think, absolutely. A guy that has that much should be generous, shouldn't he? A guy that's got $50 billion should be generous. Well, okay, then that begs the question, what if he had $50 million? What if his net worth was $5 million? What if his net worth was $500,000? What if his net worth was $50,000? What if his net worth was $50? Should he be generous then? What kind of expectations would we have on him? You see, because what I want to do today is I want to talk about generosity, but right out of the gate, I got to make the case that generosity is about our hearts. It's not about our net worth. You know, God has a lot to say about generosity, and it doesn't matter what your income level is, because He knows that our hearts are tightly intertwined with our wallets, right? With our stuff. Matthew 6:21, a lot of people know this verse, says this, for where your treasure is, there your what? There your heart will also be. There your heart will be also, right? Again, that image of our heart attached to our wallet. But here's the thing. Generosity isn't just about money, is it? It's a heart issue. It's a choice. It's a way of life. It's our level of generosity, our strength in generosity. It can be expressed in a lot of different ways. How we see the value of other people, our willingness to help other people, our desire maybe to see the world through God's eyes instead of our own eyes. So for us to investigate what generosity is today, we've got to bring our whole heart into the conversation. You see, but sadly, there's just a few people who just don't get it. Check out this infomercial.
My name is Biff Tadstead. That is my name. BIFFTADSTEAD. Biff Tadstead. Hello, everyone. Biff Tadstead here. Come on, guys. Welcome, everyone. Biff Tadstead here. You may recognize me as two-time Candyland Regional Champion. Back this week to help you get stronger in generosity. With generosity, it's important to share everything, even the chicken pox. Now that's the spirit, kids.
James, dude, you gotta see this.
What is he doing?
I don't know.
Should we call a doctor? I mean, is he okay? Oh, wow.
Come on, man. You promised you wouldn't show that video to anybody. Ryan, come on, man. You know, you don't have to go out of your way to do generous activities. You can do them in everyday life. Not yet. Everyday life. Like, if you make a smoothie that you don't like. Just hand it to a friend. He's paralyzed with gratitude. I hope you've learned some helpful tips today on how to be more generous. This has been Biff Tadstag, teaching you how to get stronger in generosity. You got it? Yeah. Nailed it. Come on, guys.
Well, don't clap or they might do more. Whose kid is that anyway? His parents need some help, I'm pretty sure. You know, when it comes to generosity, it's a word that we toss around quite a bit, and it gets used in a lot of different kind of contexts in our world today. And ultimately, as I said before, you know, when it comes to the idea of generosity, everybody's for it. In fact, we're pretty sure that everybody should be generous. Well, no, mainly we think that people who are wealthy should be generous. And do you know what the definition of wealthy is in that case? Anybody that has more than you, right? If they have more than me, then they should be generous. Absolutely. They should give, they should serve, they should do those things and think about their neighbors. Yes, absolutely. Me? Give, serve, help. You got to understand, I have a lot of obligations, right? Now, before we jump into this too far, let me just say this. You know, if you're visiting today, if you're fairly new at Countryside, we care way more about you than we do about your wallets, which is why we rarely ever pass a plate, which is why we have the white boxes in the back where you can make your choice to do that or not do that, okay? But here's the reality, guys. Our wallets are tied to our hearts, our stuff. And God cares deeply about our hearts. And so that's why we really need to address this issue. In the New Testament, there's one point where the Apostle Paul has been out and he's been planting churches, and one of his main leaders is a guy named Timothy, and he writes a letter to Timothy because Timothy is in one of those churches and he's trying to help lead it. And this is what Paul says to him in regard to teaching people about generosity, 1 Timothy 6:18. Paul says this, tell them, and again he's talking about people in the church who have some means. He said to use their money to do good. They should be rich in good works and generous to those in need, always being ready to share with others. You know, Countryside's almost 22 years old now. And ultimately, we've almost always struggled to some degree financially. Possibly, you know, because we don't pass an offering plate very often. Possibly because we don't talk about it very often. And yet I can tell you some of the most amazing acts of generosity that I have seen here, of people towards the church, of people towards each other. It's just been amazing to see that. And I am so proud of the way so many regular attenders have followed what Timothy has right here. Now, if you're checking us out, if you're just checking out church, if you're just checking out who God is, you can just relax. We're not going to pass a plate or ask you to give anything. But what I'm hoping today is that no matter where you might be on that spiritual spectrum, from just checking God out to maybe just cross that line of faith into a relationship with Jesus, or maybe been following Him for a long time, that all of us, by the time we finish today, will just have a little clearer picture, maybe a reminder of what generosity looks like. And what we're going to do is we're going to just visit a couple of different events in the Bible, and we're going to walk them through just kind of to flesh out this concept of generosity. Now, the first event happened, and it's from the Old Testament. And it involves a single mom. And like most single parents of today, she was struggling just to kind of make ends meet. And to make matters worse, there was a famine in their country at that time. Food was very scarce. And now that's obviously not something that any of us have really experienced. And she's just about out of food. And it's just her and her son. And she comes to this point of realization, and it's a horrible thing. She comes to the point of realizing, we're done. I've got a little bit of oil, I got a little bit of flour, I can make one more loaf of bread, we're going to eat that, and then we're going to die, because I have no way of going beyond that. Not a very happy moment for anybody, especially not a parent. Well, not too far away, there was a prophet of God, a man named Elijah. And God had been using Elijah in just amazing ways. And mostly he'd been using Elijah to show a very dark and corrupt world who God really is. And God had more plans for Elijah. But at this point in history, Elijah is on the run from this very dark government, this very dark and corrupt government. And so God tells Elijah, he says, I want you to go to this particular city, find this widow, and I just want you to stay there for a little while. So this prophet shows up on the doorstep of this single mom. And he's like, hi, God told me to just hang out here for a little while. And can you imagine her reaction? And I'm thinking, she'd be like, well, fine, come on in, because you're going to have the whole place to yourself pretty soon, because we're going to take that little bit of flour and that little bit of oil, and we're going to have one last meal, and then we're going to die, and then you can have the whole place to yourself. So come on in. Let's read about it. 1 Kings 17, it's in your notes. Elijah saw a widow gathering sticks, and he asked her, would you please bring me a little water in a cup? As she was going to get it, he called to her, bring me a bite of bread too. But she said, I swear by the Lord your God that I don't have a single piece of bread in the house, and I have only a handful of flour left in a jar and a little cooking oil in the bottom of a jug. I was just gathering a few sticks to cook this last meal, and then my son and I will die. Not exactly a good time for company to show up, is it? Verse 13, but Elijah said to her, don't be afraid. Go ahead and do just what you've said, but make a little bread for me first. Then use what's left to prepare a meal for yourself and your son. What would you do if you were this woman? Wouldn't you be really tempted to just toss him out on his ear? Because he's kind of demanding, isn't he? He's a little bossy. But look what Elijah says to her in verse 14. For this is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. There will always be flour and olive oil left in your containers until the time when the Lord sends rain and the crops grow again. See, God is giving her a promise if she's ready to trust. In a sense, we're all kind of in that same boat. Thankfully, not really the life and death kind of part. But every time that we're moved to give, to be generous, to support our church with our tithe, and then to give over and above that to support the work of other ministries, to serve other people. Whenever we're moved to do something that might require, and here's the word sacrifice. In fact, write the word sacrifice next to that verse in your notes. Whenever we're moved to do something that could really be termed as a sacrifice, to help out a single parent, to care for a sick neighbor, to sponsor a child overseas, to give something away that we really feel like we need, to give to your church because you want others to know that they can have life. They can have life and have it to the full here on earth, and they can have life forever in a relationship with Jesus Christ. Whenever we feel the Holy Spirit leading us towards generosity, in the back of our minds and maybe right on the front of our lips comes the question, okay, God, but if I do this, are you going to take care of me? Are you going to take care of my family? Do you have my back? You see, because it's always a hard issue. It's always a trust issue. Now, every time we step out in generosity, in essence, we're taking a step in our faith. Especially if we, like this widow that we just read, or this single mom that we just read about, if we give in a way that causes some kind of sacrifice on our part, then that means a decision to say, yes, God, I believe that you will take care of me, and I believe that you will take care of my family. And if we're going to progress, if we're going to go stronger in our trust and in our faith and in our generosity, we have to settle that question, because that's where the rub is. Because honestly, guys, here's the deal. If God has our back, why would we not be generous? But if he doesn't, why would we be? Really, I mean, that's the question. Why would we be? And now this can be a struggle, and I get that. And especially for those, if you're just kind of early in your spiritual journey and you haven't had any experiences to see how God will walk you through that whole process. That's where it's great that we have these historical events. That's where we can read about what God did in the Bible to so many people, with so many people, and that helps us grow our faith. Now again, the world thinks generosity is a great idea for wealthy people. And who are the wealthy people? Anybody that has more than me, right? But what about us? What about us? Back when I had only been a Christ follower for a couple of years, Christina and I one day, I remember after church, I remember this conversation. Because you'll find this out. Christina's actually the spiritual one in the family and the smart one too. So if you haven't figured that out yet. So we get home from church and she's like, we really need to start tithing to the church. And I'm like, are you insane? We just bought a house. We're going to have kids pretty soon. We need a car, or there's all these other things. And, because I was looking at it from a purely economic standpoint, not a spiritual standpoint. And she said, you really need to pray about that. And when your wife tells you need to pray about something, you are so much trouble. You are like, okay, good luck with that. So we had the discussion. I remember praying about it. I remember feeling, yes, this is the right thing. It's a trust issue. I want to trust God with everything. And I had one of those amazing experiences. And I remember one of the first tithe check that I wrote, because it was like $232 and some change. And I was like, ooh, that's hard. And like 2-3 weeks later, I get it like an insurance refund check for something I have no idea where it came from for $232 and some change. And I went, oh, okay. Look at Matthew 6:33. It says, seek the kingdom of God above what? And live righteously, and he will give you everything you want. No need. Is there a difference? It's not the same. What I want isn't the same thing as what I need. God says, trust me. Trust me. I got your back. Now, I realize, the tithing piece, that is a hump. Boy, it's hard to get past that. I've seen people, no problem with this. I've seen people, it's taken them years to get past that. And the other thing is that you'll almost always be tested in that somehow something's going to, I remember even after that first experience was like, great. And then like 2 months later, our car broke or something. It was like, whoa. Because, again, will you stick with it? And all I can tell you is that in the 26 years that I've been doing that, God has always given me what I needed as I've trusted him. And it's getting to the point now I can't imagine not doing it. I get to pay it on one day, the next day I don't even do it. It just comes from my bank. I just set it up. It's automatic, goes right to the church. Here's the thing, guys, when I look around, the people that I see who are happiest, who are the most joy-filled, are also the most generous. Why is that? Because they've come to a place where they've realized that this is a heart issue and that they want to see the world through God's eyes, and that ultimately as they begin to see the world through God's eyes and they get their eyes off of them, then their hearts begin to grow. See, God when we model ourselves after him, when we say, I want to be a little bit more like Jesus, because what does it say? It says, God so loved the world that he what? Gave, right? Why? Because he's a generous, generous God. And he wants us to be like his son. And he says right there, I'm going to take care of you. Now that, again, don't get mixed up with that. It doesn't mean money. It doesn't mean we're all going to be wealthy if we give. And if some guy tells you that, just run away because it's not true. What it means is God's favor. It means God's blessing. It means you will always have what you need. And your heart will grow in the process. Last year, we had this incredibly difficult financial year in my family. Medical stuff, just crazy. Started out with my neck fusion and then, wisdom teeth, and Christina messed up her wrist and MRIs. And we have a good insurance policy at the church, and you guys are very generous for providing that, so thank you. But it has a sizable deductible and a sizable copay. And I think by the end of the year, we were like $32,000 out of pocket in medical and dental last year. And I'm like, whoa, okay. How are we going to pull this off? And a couple different families from the church just paid off a few of those bills for us. And I was just like, wow, that's cool. Here's the thing. Right now, sitting out there, you guys are dividing yourselves into camps. Okay? Let me express it to you this way. There might be two families, two guys who just happen to be sitting next to each other in one of the green chairs, right? They're right next to each other, each in their own green chair. And on one side, you have a family, you have a guy, and again, these would be people who have crossed the line of faith at some point, and maybe they've been going to Countryside about the same amount of time. And for one, he maybe gives occasionally, mostly to special needs, and usually in amounts that really aren't a sacrifice. For the other, though, he trusts God fully and completely, and he trusts God even with his stuff and his money, and he tithes and gives joyfully, even to the point of what feels like a sacrifice. And do you know what's funny? Each one thinks the other one's a little crazy. It's true. Each one thinks the other one is a little crazy. Because the guy who doesn't tithe, he's like, man, you drink the Kool-Aid, buddy. Did you ever take a math class, right? Ever? Or you're a wackadoo. What are you doing? And the other guy's like, buddy, God's got your back. You can trust him, yes, even with your money and your stuff. And I wouldn't want to go through this life without God's assurance that he's got my back, even, yes, in the area of my finances. And each one thinks the other one is a little crazy. So the question for you today, if you are a follower of Jesus, is which crazy do you want to be? Because it's going to be one or the other. Which crazy do you choose? Back to the story. So the prophet Elijah, he washes up for dinner, and he comes back, and the woman decides, you know what? I'm going to trust in what this guy is saying, what God's going to do, the promise of God. And so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to do this thing. And she takes what's left of the oil and she takes what's left of the flour and she pours it all out. And she makes one last little loaf of bread and she brings it to Elijah. And she's like, here you go. I'm going to trust. And I'm making this up, but I just imagine in my head that she was like a little snarky about the whole thing. Like, here you go, buddy. Don't worry about us starving over here. Hope you don't choke on it. There you go. That's just my take. And then she goes back to the kitchen. And when she walks back in the kitchen, she sees the jars and she sees that God had resupplied the jars. And of course, she's just blown away. It blew her mind. So she pours out what's left in each jar, and she makes another loaf of bread, and she takes it to the boy who's just about ready to starve, and he wolfs that down, and then she goes back in the kitchen, and again, I just imagine her like peeking around the corner. Anybody in there? And she looks at the jars, and she sees that God had resupplied. Verse 16, it says, there was always enough flour and olive oil left in the containers, just as the Lord had promised through Elijah. Now, I don't know how long they had to eat bread while the famine was still going on in the land. And you can make the case that they got very sick of bread. But you know what? They had what they needed. So many stories in this church. I think of one family. Guy in town is professional. He makes a very good living. He and his wife, I just watched them, and they have the spiritual gift of giving. They do. And they just give consistently. They give to the church. They give to other causes over and above their tithe. Just this last year, there was a situation. They didn't even know these people. It was just a young girl, and she just needed to be in a different scenario for school, but they didn't have the money for tuition, and they just wrote the check. Didn't even know them. They also paid for the carpet that was completely worn out in the atrium and in the offices, and they just helped pay for that. Why? Because they want people to come in here and see that we give God our best, not our leftovers. I know so many people who in their businesses, they've started small businesses, and they've just said right up front, they come and tell me, Mark, you know what? I'm just whatever 10% of the profit's going to God right off of the top. That's awesome. Another event that happened. This is one that you might know about, whether you grew up in the church or not. It comes out of Luke 21, and it says this: while Jesus was in the temple, he watched the rich people dropping their gifts in the collection box. Then a poor widow came by and dropped in 2 small coins. I tell you the truth, Jesus said, this poor widow has given more than all of the rest of them, for they have given a tiny part of their surplus, but she, poor as she is, has given what? Everything. So Jesus is in Jerusalem, and he's in the temple, and there's a tithing box there, and he's watching the people come in. And I'm not positive of this, but I think I read somewhere that those tithing boxes, that they were made of wood, and they were like white, and they were about this tall. Have you seen those? Have you seen those? I don't think I've ever seen anybody lined up to like put money in them. So anyway, made that up. And you see, what was happening is there's the box there, and they make a big show out of it, and people are like, hey, you know, look, I got so much, and look at what I'm putting in the box. And this widow comes up, and she's got so little, and she's meek, and she's embarrassed, and she drops her in her 2 mites, is what it's called, or 2 coins. And Jesus has his closest followers there, and he's like, guys, you see that? Can I just tell you, do you understand that even the smallest of gifts, even the smallest act of generosity matters to God? He's like, you know, big gifts, that's good, great. You see, but too often, you know, when Warren Buffett gives, there's lots of zeros attached, but there's still a ton of zeros left in the portfolio, right? So that in the gift, there's really no sacrifice. No meals are missed. No spending patterns have to be rethought or readjusted. No quality of life decisions are at stake, like the daily visit to the coffee shop. But Jesus says, I want you to understand it is different when somebody gives sacrificially, when somebody gives generously. This widow, she gave 2 mites. You know what that was? Those were the smallest coins in circulations in Rome at that time. You know what it was? It was chewing gum money. I wonder if they had bubble gum back then. I'm not sure they did. That's what it was. But it was a sacrifice. It's not the size of the gift. It's the size of the faith. And that's what grows our hearts. And God cares deeply about our hearts, guys. And when God moves us towards generosity, what he's hoping is that we will trust him and that we will give him our best, not our leftovers. Great story about that. One more story about King David. A lot of you know about King David. And David, when he was reigning over Israel, the king of Israel, Israel enjoyed this time of incredible blessing, incredible expansion and economic blessing. And of course, if you know about David, you know God, just blessed him, and he loved God so much, except he was human. He wasn't perfect, and he messed up. He had good days and he had bad days. And in this particular situation, David was at a point where he wanted to honor God. He wanted to do something to honor God. And so in that time, what you would do oftentimes is you would go and you would buy a piece of land, and then you would build an altar on that land as a tribute to God. And so David wants to do this. And so he goes out and he finds some land. And it was a threshing floor, with the oxen, and they're threshing the crops. And he goes and he makes an offer. He finds the guy who owns it, and he's like, hey, I want to buy this from you. I want to build an altar to God here. And this guy looks at him and he's like, you're the king, man. You're like Michael Jordan. Take it. Right? Take it. It's yours. Take the oxen too for sacrifice. In fact, you know what? I'll build the altar for you. You don't have to do that. Don't get your kingly hands dirty. I will do it for you. And I love David's reaction. He said this in 2 Samuel. But the king replied to Araunah, the owner of the land, no, I insist on buying it, for I will not present burnt offerings to the Lord my God that have cost me what? Nothing. So David paid him 50 pieces of silver for the threshing floor and the oxen. And do you know what? That is the piece of land that eventually one of David's sons builds the temple in Jerusalem on. I will give God my best, not my leftovers. I want to be stronger in generosity. And you know how we get stronger in generosity? By practicing. It's by practicing. By trusting that God will have my back, that I want to be a little bit more like Jesus every day. And if I'm going to do that, then that means that I need to see the world through God's generous eyes, not my not so generous eyes. Now, I know for some of you, you grew up in a family maybe where there was a heritage of generosity and a heritage of smart financial management, or maybe it was just the complete opposite for you. I grew up in a situation where I watched my dad, who, when there was a time in his life where he had some money and he was so unbelievably generous, and I don't know how many people he put through college, and he had businesses at the time, and he helped his employees in ways that were so far above and beyond. And in that, I think, I hope, I pray that I got some understanding of what it means to be generous. And as I've grown to understand that God has my back and what the ultimate purpose of generosity is, and that my heart will grow as I trust Him. Matthew 6:21, what did it say? For where your treasure is, there your what? Where's your heart today? Because, guys, you can trust Him. He's got your back and every other part of you. Sometimes we're willing to trust God with our eternal souls, but nothing else. Not our time or our talents or our treasures. Everybody in the world loves the idea of generosity, especially for people who are wealthy. And who are wealthy people? Anybody that has more than us, right? But what about us? God says, if I lead you to it, I'm going to supply your needs, just like I did for that single mom. Jesus says, you know what? That widow, she gave more than anybody else. Why? Because she didn't give from her excess. David said, if I trust God, then I will sacrifice for Him and I will give Him my best, not my leftovers. Let me end with a quick story. There's a man who's been coming to our church for a little while. And a few weeks ago, he showed up at the office one day, and I wasn't even here. And I'm so proud of the staff because they did such a phenomenal job. And he showed up, and he was just hurting. And they just surrounded him, and they prayed for him, and they counseled with him, and then they got him set up for long-term help and got him taken care of. And just the other day, he came back. And I was in my office, and Lori buzzed me and told me that he was there. And I admit, my first thought was, well, I wonder what he needs. And before I got out there, Christina was already out there talking to him. I tell you that she was the spiritual one? She was already out there talking to him, and he was just like, oh, thank you so much. Thank you for everything that you did for me. I really, really appreciate it, and just wanted to come by. And he hands her a $100 bill. And of course, she's like, no. We didn't do it for money, and, we're just glad you're here, and, you keep the money. And I'll never forget this. He looks at her and he says, you know what? God will take care of me. You put this in your broken people fund for people like me. Wow. Here's a guy that knows about generosity in the midst of struggles. Why? Because he knows God will take care of him. He knows God's going to take care of him. So where's your heart today? How short are those strings from your heart to your wallet? What step might you take today? What area do you know that God is tugging on your heart, maybe to be just a little bit more generous, to open yourself up a little bit more? And are you ready and willing to let God stretch you to take a step in that direction today? Will you trust that God truly does have your back? And He will give you what you need if you trust Him. On the front of your notes, we gave you that blue box as we have all summer. And I just want to challenge you guys this week to just take some time just to sit down and pray and fill out those questions and talk to God and just let Him stretch you a little bit, because as He stretches us, He'll grow us and He'll grow our hearts. And that's a good thing. Pray with me if you would. Father God, as we come today, again, Lord, just incredibly grateful. Grateful, God, that you are the one who came for us first. You are God that loves us so much that you gave us your Son. Father, that we might have life, that we might have it to the full here, and that we might have it forever with you in heaven. And Lord, I know that this is a message, God, that all of us at some level are going to feel a little stretched. And so, Father, wherever we are, I pray, God, would you meet with us, speak to us, help us to stop for a moment at some point this week and just talk to you and have a conversation and listen to what it is that you might want to do in our life, Lord, that's going to stretch us just a little bit. Because again, God, as we practice, we're going to grow. As we practice, we're going to get stronger. As we practice, Father, our hearts are going to become a little bit more like your heart. As we practice, Father, you're going to use us. We're going to be your hands and feet, and Father, that's what we want to be. And so, God, thank you for that. Thank you for stretching us. Thank you, God, that you love us right now at this moment, no matter where we are, that you cannot love us any more than you do right now. That it is not based on what we do or don't do with this message. And yet, God, you love us too much not to stretch us, not to challenge us, not to help us become a little bit more like your Son. And so, God, I pray, would you help us to do that? Take that step, whatever it is, no matter how small it might be, that we would take that step, God. We'd reach out, open our hearts, and just get a little stronger in our generosity. Father, thank you. Thank you for loving us so much. And we do love you, and we pray all this in Jesus' name. And everybody said, amen.